The world had never seen Barron Trump like this before. For years, he had been the most private member of America's most public family, rarely speaking, rarely seen, always in the shadow of the towering political figure who was his father. But everything changed on that crisp morning in Washington, D.C. when the White House press office announced an event that no one had anticipated. At 8 p.m. tonight, the statement read, "Barron Trump will address the nation with a personal message." Speculation erupted instantly. News anchors scrambled to piece together theories. Social media buzzed with endless questions. Why now? What did he have to say? The youngest son of President Donald J. Trump had never spoken publicly beyond a few brief appearances. What could possibly be so important that he would break his silence now? As the sun dipped below the horizon, millions of Americans gathered in front of their televisions and devices. The anticipation was palpable. This wasn't just another political speech. It felt personal. And when the clock struck 8 o'clock, the screen faded to black before opening to a simple image, the iconic White House podium. Then there he was. Barron Trump stood tall, his lean frame filling the screen. At just 18 years old, he had grown into a striking figure, his blonde hair swept back, his expression serious but composed. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit and a crimson tie, he looked eerily like a younger version of his father, but the emotion behind his eyes was entirely his own. He took a deep breath. The silence in the room was deafening as the cameras zoomed in on his face. Finally, he spoke. "I never thought I would stand here," he began, his voice steady but filled with a raw vulnerability that caught everyone off guard. "For most of my life, I've been told who I am. The world has seen me as a shadow, a quiet figure in the background. But tonight, I want to share my truth. I want to talk about my father, not as a president, not as a politician, but as the man I've known my entire life." The room seemed to hold its breath. For years, political opponents and media outlets had painted Donald Trump in bold, unyielding strokes, a figure defined by controversy, power, and unrelenting ambition. But Barron's words promised something different. Something deeper. He continued, his voice tightening slightly with emotion. "Growing up in the Trump family wasn't easy. People assumed that being the president's son meant a life of privilege and perfection. But they don't see the other side, the nights I stayed awake wondering if my father would make it home safe. The moments when the world judged him without knowing the man who held my hand when I was scared, or who told me that no matter how loud the world became, my voice mattered." A ripple of surprise washed over the nation. This wasn't a rehearsed political message. It was something far more intimate. Barron paused, gripping the sides of the podium as if grounding himself. His next words cut through the silence like a knife. "My father is not a perfect man. I won't stand here and pretend that he is. But I've seen sides of him that no camera, no headline, and no debate stage has ever captured. And tonight, I want to share those stories with you." The weight of Barron Trump's words hung in the air. Across America, living rooms were silent as viewers leaned closer to their screens. This was not the polished rhetoric of a seasoned politician. It was the unfiltered voice of a son grappling with a lifetime spent in the public eye. He adjusted the microphone slightly, his knuckles white against the polished wood of the podium. "I know what people say about my father," Barron continued, his voice lower now, almost as if he were sharing a secret with the nation. "I've heard the criticism. I've read the headlines. And there were times when I wondered if they were right. Was he too harsh? Too distant? Did he care more about power than about us? His family?" He paused for a breath, and when he spoke again, his tone softened. "But that's not the man I know. The man I know is the one who showed up when it mattered most." A faint smile touched his lips as he recalled a memory. "When I was 10 years old, I got really sick. Nothing serious, just a bad flu. My mom did everything she could, but one night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling worse. I remember lying there in the dark, scared, and then I heard his footsteps. My dad had just flown back from a rally, exhausted. But he didn't hesitate. He sat by my bed, held my hand, and told me stories until I fell asleep. No cameras, no audience, just a father watching over his son." The image painted by Barron's words was a stark contrast to the public persona most people knew. For years, Donald Trump had been portrayed as brash and unyielding, a man obsessed with winning. Yet here was his youngest child, revealing a side of him that no one had ever seen. "He wasn't always easy to talk to," Barron admitted, his gaze steady. Sometimes I felt like I had to earn his attention, but when I did, it meant everything. And the truth is, he never stopped pushing me to be better. Not just in school or sports, but as a person. His voice trembled slightly as he shared a more recent moment. One that seemed to cut deeper. Last year, I made a mistake. A big one. I won't go into details, but I let him down. I expected anger. I expected disappointment. But when I finally told him, he didn't yell. He didn't push me away. He said, "Barron, you're my son. Nothing changes that." And in that moment, I realized, no matter how loud the world gets, his love is the one thing that has never wavered. The camera caught the flicker of raw emotion crossing his face, and across the nation, people felt it. This was not a carefully orchestrated political maneuver. It was a young man bearing his heart. "I know some of you will never agree with him," Barron acknowledged. "I know some of you may never forgive him for decisions he's made. But tonight, I'm not asking you to change your mind about the President of the United States. I'm asking you to see him the way I do. A father who tries, who fails, but who loves his family more than anything." He leaned forward slightly, his next words striking with quiet force. "And I'll tell you something else, he never stopped believing in me. Even when I doubted myself. Even when the world thought I didn't have a voice, he told me I did." As the clock ticked past the 15-minute mark, Barron's message grew more urgent. "Maybe that's why I'm standing here now. For so long, I let other people define who I am. But I'm not just a name, or a headline, or a political pawn. I'm a son who loves his father, flaws and all. And no matter where life takes us next, I will never be ashamed to call him my dad." The room fell silent once more, but the echoes of his words reverberated far beyond the White House walls. For the first time, the American people were hearing not just about Donald Trump, but about the man behind the legend, seen through the eyes of the person who knew him best. And Barron Trump wasn't finished yet. Barron Trump took a slow breath, his fingers tightening on the edge of the podium as if bracing himself for what came next. For years, he had lived under the weight of a name that meant everything and nothing all at once. Tonight, that burden felt heavier than ever. "People think they know what it's like to grow up as a Trump," he said quietly. "They picture golden towers, private jets, and a life without struggle. But the truth? The truth is much harder." His eyes scanned the room, his gaze steady as he continued. "I didn't choose this life. I didn't ask to grow up with cameras following me to school or strangers judging every word I said or didn't say. But from the moment my father announced he was running for president, my childhood was no longer mine." A shadow passed over his face as he spoke, a flicker of pain that couldn't be hidden. "When I was 12, I overheard a group of adults talking about me. They called me cold, strange, and a spoiled kid who would never live up to his father's legacy. They didn't know me. They didn't care. But those words, they stayed with me." His voice softened, but the emotion behind it sharpened. What they didn't see was how lonely it felt. My father was running the country. My mom was doing everything to protect me. But some nights, when I was alone, I wondered if I even mattered outside of my last name. The rawness in his tone pierced through the screen, reaching into the hearts of viewers across the country. This wasn't just a speech, it was a confession. "I know what people say about my father," Barron admitted, his lips pressing into a thin line. "They call him ruthless. They say he only cares about winning. And maybe to the world, that's who he is. But at home, he was the man who told me I was stronger than the names they called me. He was the one who reminded me that being a Trump didn't mean being perfect, it meant never giving up." A tremor touched his voice as he continued. "What people don't know is that my father worries. He won't admit it, not to the cameras, not to his critics, but I've seen it. I've seen him pace the floor at midnight, wondering if he made the right decision. I've heard him on the phone, checking on ordinary people who wrote to him because they had no one else to turn to. That's the man I know." He swallowed hard, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his otherwise composed exterior. "I also know how much it hurts him when people think he doesn't care. He may not say it, but I see it in his eyes. Every insult, every lie, it cuts deeper than anyone realizes." For the first time, his voice trembled as he shared a moment that had never been made public. "Last Christmas, after dinner, it was just the two of us in his study. He asked me if I was proud of him. And for a man who seems so sure of himself, I sought out. I saw a father wondering if everything he's fought for was worth it." The nation held its breath as Barron revealed his answer. "I told him the truth. I said, 'Dad, I don't always agree with you. But I know you love us. And that's enough.' That night, he hugged me tighter than he ever had before. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, though he blinked them back. I'm not asking anyone to agree with everything he's done. But I am asking you to remember, behind the speeches, behind the headlines, he's a father who carries a heavier burden than most of us will ever understand. His voice grew stronger, more resolute. And no matter what happens next, I will always be proud of the man who never let me forget that my voice matters even when the world tried to silence it. The air in the room grew heavier with each passing word. Barron Trump was no longer just a shadow in the background. Tonight, he stood fully in the light, offering a glimpse of both the man who raised him and the young man he was becoming. And as he lifted his chin, it was clear there was still more to say. The room remained heavy with silence as Barron Trump steadied himself. His shoulders squared against the weight of everything he had already revealed, but there was more. And this time, it wasn't just about his father. It was about the toll that power had taken on all of them. My father always told me that nothing worth having comes without sacrifice, Barron said, his voice quieter now as if each word cost him something. But what he didn't tell me, what I had to learn on my own, is that sometimes those sacrifices leave scars no one else can see. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the rawness in his expression. When he became president, I thought I was ready. I thought it wouldn't change us. But I was wrong. A flicker of pain crossed his face as he continued. I remember my 11th birthday. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, cake, friends, a chance to be a kid. But instead, I spent the day watching the news tear my family apart. They didn't care that I was just a boy who missed his dad. They cared about ratings, about headlines, and somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like I was allowed to just be me. He took a deep breath, the memory still raw. There were nights when I heard my mom crying behind closed doors. She tried to hide it, to protect me. But I knew how much it hurt her to see the man she loved being torn down every day. And no matter how many times I told myself it didn't matter, it did. For the first time, his composure cracked. His voice trembled as he revealed the hardest truth of all. When my father ran for re-election, I prayed he would lose. Not because I didn't believe in him, but because I wanted my family back. I wanted to stop feeling like a prisoner in my own life. The honesty in his words struck like a thunderclap. This wasn't a carefully crafted political message, it was the raw confession of a young man who had paid a price no child should ever have to pay. I know how much my father loves this country, Barron continued, his voice thick with emotion. I know he believes that everything he's done is for the good of the American people. But there were days I just wanted my dad, not the president, not the businessman, just him. A long pause followed, his next words hanging heavy in the air. People think power makes you untouchable. But the truth? It breaks you. It breaks the people you love. And no matter how strong you are, it leaves you wondering if it was all worth it. He lifted his chin, his gaze fierce with resolve. I'm not here to defend every decision my father has ever made. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for or what to believe. But I am here to say this, behind the politics, behind the power, there is a family. A family that has bled and cried and fought to stay together even when the world tried to tear us apart. The weight of his words was undeniable. Across the country, millions of viewers sat spellbound, hearing a side of the Trump story no one had ever dared to tell. And no matter what happens next, Barron added, his voice steadying, I will never forget the price we paid. I will never forget the nights we felt alone. And I will never stop hoping that one day the world will see my father as I do, not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as a man who loved his family in the only way he knew how. He drew in a slow, shaky breath, his next words laced with both pain and pride. And despite everything, despite the chaos, the criticism, the cost, I am proud to be his son. Because through it all, he never let me forget that family is the one thing worth fighting for. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, an echo of all the truths that had been spoken. But deep in his heart, Barron knew this wasn't the end of his story. There was one last truth the world needed to hear. Barron Trump stood still for a moment, his hands gripping the podium as if grounding himself for the final words he needed to say. The weight of the past, the pain of growing up in the public eye, and the love he carried for his father, all of it converged in this last message to the world. I know some of you will never understand what it means to grow up in the shadow of a name like mine, he began, his voice softer but filled with purpose. But I also know that behind every famous name, behind every headline, there are people. Real people. And for better or worse, my father is one of them. The room was silent, as if every person in attendance held their breath waiting. Wondering. There were times I wished things were different, Barron admitted. I wished my father wasn't always in the spotlight. I wished my name didn't carry so much expectation. And yes, there were times I wished we could just be normal. His voice grew stronger with each word, a quiet fire burning behind his carefully composed exterior. But if there's one thing my father taught me, it's that we don't get to choose the life we're given. We only get to choose how we live it. He glanced down for a brief moment, gathering his thoughts before delivering the most unexpected truth of all. A few months ago, I asked my father if he ever regretted stepping into the world of politics. If he missed the days when life was simpler, when he was just a businessman, a father, a husband. A faint, bittersweet smile crossed his face. You know what he told me? He said, Barron, when you love something enough, you fight for it no matter how much it costs you. And no matter how hard it gets, you never walk away. That's who he is. And whether you love him or hate him, that's something no one can take away from him. Barron exhaled slowly, the depth of his father's words settling into the room. But there was still one promise he needed to make, one that belonged to him alone. For years I stayed silent, he confessed. I let the world decide who I was without ever speaking for myself. But tonight, that changes. His expression shifted, no longer just the son of a president, but a young man stepping into his own power. I'm not here to carry my father's legacy. I'm here to build my own. And I promise you, I will never let anyone else define who I am again. The resolve in his voice sent chills through the audience. For the first time, Barron Trump was not just a figure in the background. He was a force of his own. And to those of you who've ever felt unseen, he continued, his tone filled with empathy, to anyone who's been judged for where they come from or who they are, I understand you. I know what it feels like to be reduced to a name. And I'm here to tell you, your story is yours to write. Don't let anyone else hold the pen. The camera panned across the crowd, some wiping away tears, others frozen in place. No one had expected this. No one had expected him. And to my father, Barron said, his voice softening as he turned toward where Donald Trump sat, his face unreadable. I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Not because you're the president, not because of your success, but because no matter how loud the world got, you never stopped being my dad. Emotion flickered across Donald Trump's face. Just for a moment. But it was enough. I don't know what the future holds, Barron concluded, his voice echoing in the chamber. But whatever happens next, I'll face it the way you taught me. With my head high, my heart open, and the courage to speak my truth. He stepped back from the podium as the audience rose to their feet. Applause crashing through the room like a wave. It wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration. And as Barron Trump walked away, the world knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of his story.